mic is muted, so if you'll unmute all your mics.
There's a reason.
Let's go, you grab, or Mike, if you want to grab. Kind of hard reach.
I'm happy.
Yes.
It is gonna get my ribs.
Yeah.
Reach across that table.
Exactly.
The end, I feel like is here
There,
too.
something
I
right
feel
here.
like you're
Yeah.
slightly farther from the
Yeah.
center. I don't know if that's true, but
No.
I
Okay, I really need my feet on the floor.
Can't we use
Back
your
hurts,
foot
so
from
that
now?
is
Yeah.
my feet are usually dangling too.
I think,
I like
okay, well, back
on
can't
this
take
part
it.
of the- We were at the volunteer dinner, some of the commissioners were there last week, and me and my
Yeah,
wife
ready?
got started kind of right on the leg of the table.
We are ready when you are, Sam and Mike.
Oh, great, perfect.
Great. Yeah, well, this is interesting having the chair remote. The Jimmy John's looks really good, you guys. So eat slowly and savor every bite for me here. Hi from Washington, DC, and I'm glad to be a part of this remotely. One of the pandemic carryovers that we can do things like this. So we'll open the April 19th meeting work session for the Planning Commission. And we have just one major business item to take care of. The 2.0, the Yard Elements Code update introduction. And I think staff also has a little bit of a background on the item that you all worked on at our last meeting as well. And then if we have anything else, we will likely have a little bit of time. And I'm ready to turn it over to staff if there's not anything else.
Wait just a minute.
Great, I'm just gonna make sure
Do you mind
recording
holding
is.
this? Hold on, we're not quite there.
We just had to, for those on Zoom, we had to just reboot the system, so we're just finishing out that. We're so grateful that IT is here to help us. So thanks for your patience, and we'll reconvene here when we get the go ahead. Sorry. No, you're
Okay.
totally fine. Take your time.
I assume you can hear us and see us and
Yes,
everything.
we
Yeah.
can hear you now, Commissioner. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Do I want to end this event?
That happens to me actually every time I disconnect. Oh, but not usually on Wi-Fi.
Our Wi-Fi, yeah, see, it's.
You already mapped your network, right?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
That's because-
Do that.
Am I friends?
You don't have to present. No stress.
Literally, I'm just trying to save things. That's all I'm gonna do.
Okay.
Give you a piece of paper.
All right.
Uh,
Should I report on?
Guess I can use that.
Or no?
See, this is-
All right.
There was one meeting that we didn't have IT and it like nearly
And
ended
that's
here
just-
for everyone. It was so frustrating. We were hopeless without IT.
Yeah, I'm always confused.
Oh,
We're ready, Sam.
You saw me. Okay, I think we're back in business. So yes, thank you for chairing the meeting tonight. Commissioner Mills, we appreciate your remote attendance as well as yours, Commissioner Ebler. I'll start with just giving kind of a brief update. You guys will recall at our last meeting, you reviewed that daycare application. The applicant contacted staff and asked to put it on hold for kind of an indefinite amount of time. We gave them a 6-month window to either pick it back up or formally withdraw. So by September, that's when the 6 months expires. We'll know kind of what's going on there, but that's why it's not on tonight's agenda. It's the applicant initiated, maybe not a full withdrawal, but an indefinite hold. So
Thanks for that update.
tonight's meeting is going to focus largely on kind of like internal city maintenance for our code. Commissioner Mills, are you good if I just kind of keep rolling with this, or do you have anything else you want?
Yes, no, that I think that's great. Just for the public, that it was just a simple update, but the main business item that we're moving into is a specific cleanup that I think you'll describe process wise, why we're doing it and how we're chunking it throughout the year.
Yes. So tonight is going to be maybe a little bit of overlapping terms because we're looking at a zoning text amendment in the work session, and then we're also looking at one in the business session. So it's going to be kind of two separate things. I'm going to first just briefly explain the one we're going to touch on in the business session, and then we'll come back for item 2.0 on our work session, which is a yard elements code update. So right now we're going to talk about our business item, which is 3.1, project ZTA 23001. This is the item that was in your packet, and this is a city initiated zoning text amendment to make just kind of some minor clarifying updates to a few different titles throughout city code. Let me give you some background on this. So as part of kind of standard procedures, we use a tool called zoning interpretations. That allows, staff to coordinate with our executive staff and make kind of like reasonable technical clarifications or interpretations about areas of the code that are unclear. So it does not allow staff to rewrite a code. It does not allow us to subjectively waive a code requirement. Doesn't allow us to change anything. It just allows us to say, this area of the city code is a little unclear. Let's rely on this passage found in a different chapter of our code for clarification. Let's use the American Planning Association's Planner's Dictionary for clarification, or some precedent from city history. So these are a kind of administrative tool we can use to just give some clarification on things, but they're never meant to be permanent measures. Zoning interpretations are meant to just kind of be like temporary bridges to get to a better, more formal place. And that more formal place would be through actually codifying these amendments. So we realized that we have kind of a backlog of these interpretations that have just been filed away and need to be brought through a formal review and codification process. And then we also, separate from the zoning interpretation file, just have some parts of our code that I think should come as no surprise to anyone, just aren't clear. There are parts of our code that are lacking, where maybe, again, a zoning interpretation hasn't even been done on it. We just know it's an area needing some help. So we plan as staff to just bring kind of chunks of these to the commission over the next year to tackle them bit by bit. It's not the most exciting work, but we think it's a good thing to put on our agenda for meetings we don't have a development application. So that is the background of this kind of code maintenance or code cleanup effort that's on tonight's business agenda. I'm going to defer to the chair here, but I would actually request that we go through that a little bit more in detail in the business meeting. I know typically we run through that in the work session, but I want to leave enough time to talk about the yard elements code update. So if it's agreeable to the chair, I would request that we hit that. And then if there's time, we can come back and talk more about the business session.
That sounds great, Sam. Let's proceed as you described.
Okay, great. So we've just talked about the one that's going to be in our business session. That's something that, as you can see here, and as you saw in your packet, we have actual like verbiage for. It's been put into an actual draft. It's ready for your review. It's ready for action. We're going to shift gears slightly now and talk about a code update that is just in the like kind of concept stage. We don't have verbiage prepared for it. We don't have an existing zoning interpretation. We really need the commission's guidance on where to go with it. So shifting gears, we're going to talk about yard elements now. So a little bit of background on this, similarly to what we just talked about, city code lacks clarity in a lot of passages. And one thing that it generally lacks clarification on is how to regulate yard elements. So a yard element could be something like an arbor, a trellis, pergolas, hot tubs, pools, etc. In order for us to give accurate information and consistent information to community members on these type of yard projects that are really, really common for people to be doing, we need some clarification on which yard elements should be regulated by city code. And for those that we do regulate, what should those regulations be? So here, this slide here, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the approach. Again, this is just going to be an informal discussion tonight. We don't have anything drafted for you to vote on. We just need to talk about a direction to go, and then we'll come back with a draft. Just going to set the tone now that our approach is definitely just one of trying to be clear and consistent. We don't want to over-regulate or provide like excessive oversight with people's yards, trying to strike that balance. So we hope that you will help us in kind of finding that line. This is the list of things that staff receives questions on a very regular basis. You can see It's really common things that most of us probably have one or more of in our yard. And unfortunately, our code just doesn't address them accurately or adequately. So we are going to walk you through kind of our preliminary staff recommendation on how we might address these questions, and then get your feedback on where we go from there. So we have put together this first list. From that overall list of different things, these are the 6 that we think are really just decorative or like insubstantial. We feel that these really don't need to be regulated by code. We think we should probably write a definition for each of them so that people aren't trying to categorize other things under a definition of one of these. But we feel like arbors, which I've got a picture for each of these, arbors, basketball hoops, flagpoles, fountains, planters, and trellises are all really decorative. We don't need to have setbacks on those. We don't need to have height restrictions. That's kind of been our approach there. On the other side of the coin, these are the items that we think are a little bit more structural or substantial and need some type of regulation, obviously an appropriate level. So carports, gazebos, hot tubs, pergolas, playgrounds, pools, splash pads, sport courts, and tree houses. So I'm just going to walk through our preliminary recommendation on how we might do a little bit of regulation on these things, and then we'll talk it through. So our first batch here, carports, gazebos, and pergolas. Staff is proposing that these items be regulated just the same way that any attached structure or accessory structure would be today, depending on whether they're attached to the home or detached as a freestanding structure. We would propose that a building permit be required for anything that's being attached to the home, or for a detached item that's over 200 square feet. That's consistent with how we do building permits today.
So less than 200 square feet.
Would not need a building permit, but would still need to meet setbacks, is how it's done in practice today. So for carports, gazebos, and pergolas that somebody attaches to their house, like this carport picture here, they would just have to meet the same setback requirements and height regulations as the main house itself, because we would interpret that as an addition to that structure. And then for these items that are detached, like this gazebo here, they would just have to meet the same setback and height regulations as any accessory structure like a shed, since they're freestanding. This is how these things are all regulated today. If someone were to come in and say, I want to do a carport project, this is exactly what we would tell them. But the code just needs a little bit more detail so that it's a little more user friendly, because right now that isn't immediately clear upon reading it. So what are your thoughts on this direction?
Can I ask a question? And this is the one time I wish I had a packet. but-
Oh, well, I have an extra.
No, it's okay. Because in the business items, some of the verbiage was regarding carports.
Yes.
And what is the connection? I'm sorry, I can't remember what
No,
all of
no,
it said there versus.
Yeah.
What would be?
There's definitely overlapping language between the two. They don't conflict, basically what we're proposing here and what we have in the business session.
Okay.
The business session effort was to define residential versus non-residential carports and provide some development standards for them. So that would be consistent with this. Obviously, what we're showing here has not at all been wordsmithed or
No.
fine-tuned.
Right.
So we could certainly, if the red lines we propose get passed by the city council, we would certainly make sure that any of these subsequent efforts were
All
consistent
tie
with it.
together. And then,
Yeah.
and then in terms of what we're talking about, these yard elements, do we need to distinguish between residential and non-residential?
I think that's a really good question. Obviously, in what we proposed for the carport language
Right,
in the
it
business
did,
meeting, we
yeah.
did.
Mhm.
And that came directly from an existing zoning interpretation. I would say it's less common that we get these items in non-residential projects.
Right. Yeah, but the minute we
But we could.
don't
Or we
clarify.
could just do the same approach here where it meets the same setback standards for the commercial building.
Okay,
So I think this general approach would work for residential or commercial.
You said that this is how these are regulated today. There are many of them.
Yeah.
That would not comply with setbacks, for example,
Right.
pergolas that are too close. What is the status of those? What do you consider those?
I think it depends on if it was ever legally built or not, honestly. So it could have been that those items were done under a different era before the city incorporated, when maybe they were allowed. And in that case, they would be considered legal non-conforming. If they were built just illegally, then they would remain that status. I don't think, because this is already how we do it, I don't think there's necessarily any change to like a non-conforming status. It just makes it hopefully more clear for any resident reading the code.
I think as an example, we've gotten this call in the past for accessory structures, which is what we would, if these are detached, it's what we call these. If someone called in and said, hey, my neighbor built a shed or pergola or whatever, right on the property line. This has happened where we've gone out and measured it. It's well under 200 square feet. Didn't need a permit. Code enforcement has still required that that structure be moved to comply with that 3-foot accessory building setback. Even though it didn't need a permit, it still needs to meet setback. So that's, it would be an enforcement thing, and that's what we would ask today. And we're just clarifying.
But
Yeah,
no
pergola.
change. I mean, the same story
Right.
yesterday as
Correct.
tomorrow.
Yeah, it just hopefully makes it more clear for people building today, doing it moving forward. Because I do think that there's some jargon barrier where people are like, well, I don't know what an accessory structure is, which is totally fair. So hopefully by providing it in a little more detail, it's a little bit more clear.
What's our current definition in the code on all of these?
So there isn't a definition for gazebo, for, I don't think for pergola, and then for carport, there is a definition that we proposed adding to in the business session. So with all of these terms, we would propose also adding a definition that just says what they are. So for instance, we found through our research that a gazebo is a covered roof and a pergola is a. So we would need to put some sort of definition in that gives some guardrails on what counts as these items.
And then building permit wise, I'd imagine safety precautions and
Yeah, definitely.
getting the appropriate cement systems and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so we could, I mean, it's open for discussion, obviously. We could say a building permit is required for any of them. What we have on here is the required if it's attached to the home or if it's over 200 square feet detached. That's just how the building department currently does accessory structures. But this is all open for discussion. So if you feel strongly about it being a different direction, we can talk about it for sure.
The 200 square feet comes out of the building code. So that's out of the international building code. So it's not an arbitrary local number per se. That's where we get that from them. So that's why you see that a lot.
Any other thoughts on this first chunk? We're gonna have.
One of the first things that pops in my mind is Costco and other places, they kind of sell pre-built structures that are ready to assemble that are certainly structural, certainly large, but would be under the 200 square feet.
Yeah, and for that, that's a question we get today. People are like, hey, I bought this thing at Sam's Club, I want to put it up. And we say, okay, it doesn't sound like it needs a building permit, still has to meet the setbacks. So I gotta put it in the right spot. So that could be an opportunity in a future draft of this to even spell that out explicitly. Again, to try to make the code a little more user friendly.
So for any structure, for any structure that currently exists in the city, would it just be grandfathered non-conforming use if it didn't adhere to the setbacks or building permits, et cetera?
So again, it depends on if it was legally built at the time it was built or not. So it would just would be a situational thing. I couldn't answer that for all of them.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Legally built though is the question, because you have this ambiguity that people could say, well, there was no definition for a carport and now there is. So anything I did before that.
I think we have a reasonable basis to show, hey, I know it's not super user friendly, but the code does have basis for us having regulated it this way. So I think there's reasonable basis for us to say, no, that wasn't built legally. It's just, again, unclear for like anyone who doesn't want to do a ton of research.
Yeah, if you look at the definition of accessory and the definition of structure, all these are going to, and those are both in the code today. They're all going to fit that. This is just making it so you don't have to go through this legal analysis exercise to figure out what's going on.
Try to keep it for people being like, I never read anything that said I couldn't do a gazebo. And
So what's the interpretation pre and post Cottonwood Heights existence? Is it that you had to adhere to Salt Lake City regulations
would have been Salt Lake County.
or Salt Lake County? Yeah. Is that the determination though, that for it to be legally built, it would have had to adhere to Salt Lake County pre-Cottonwood Heights?
Yeah, we usually ask for a building permit. If it's something that would have required a building permit, we say request that from records, see if the building permit is on file. Or we can use aerial imagery and some archival code information to see like when it was built and what the code was at the time. So it's not a perfect science, but we do
No.
our best to try to suss out what was built legally and not.
Right, it's bound to come up. Is
Yeah,
it-
and the onus, we do put that on applicants to kind of figure out, to do the
Right.
research, but we try to help with the resources we have.
Okay, thanks.
So another question. Dumb question. Well, no,
Not
there's no dumb
not at all,
questions. There's no
yeah.
dumb questions. What is it? So we, in the packet for,
Yes.
there's ornamental.
Yeah,
Is discussed.
There
What is the
is.
difference? And I wrote down for ornamental and my notes I took is fountains.
oh, sure.
And so I'm trying to understand the difference between definition of ornamental
Yeah, great
versus yard elements.
Yeah, great question. So the ornamental features are relating directly to things attached to a building.
Okay, that's what I
So
was
like
wondering.
something projecting from a building, an ornament on a building, and these are more like their own entity, I guess.
Okay, so maybe, because that's what, and we can talk about it later,
Sure.
but maybe that needs to be added to the definition on ornamental.
I think that's great.
So,
Yeah.
but, okay.
That's a
okay,
great clarification to make.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna pop to the next one. We can definitely come back. Just want to make sure we get through all of these. It's not too long, but we have a few. Okay, our next chunk is hot tubs, pools, and splash pads. These do all come up. People want to build splash pads in their yards. It's really fun, but we just don't know how to regulate it. So let me tell you what we have today. I'm going to do this slightly out of order. Today, code provides really vague language only on pools. Nothing about hot tubs, nothing about splash pads. And it's more related to like building code than a zoning standard. So we, again, have done our best to use reasonable interpretation from the code as it exists, but we need some clarity. Our proposal is that hot tubs, pools, and splash pads have to be in the backyard, at least 6 feet away from the main home, which is the standard for any like accessory structure, and at least 3 feet away from rear and side property lines, which again is the standard. We would require a building permit for all three unless a hot tub is just plugging into an existing gas line that's already there. What are your thoughts?
So splash pad to me is like this little 2-foot wide thing that costs about $6 that you just slide down.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like,
slip and slide.
so, I mean, like the old slip and slide. So
Yeah.
obviously that's not
Obviously,
what
that's
we're
totally
talking
fine.
about here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So do we need to define like the size
Yeah,
of something?
That would be good. Again, I think in a future draft, we would expect to share definitions for all of these with
Okay.
some metrics for like what it is, what it isn't. And that could be size, that could be like permanency. Is it something you're just rolling out on your lawn for a day of fun, or is it like a permanent?
Right,
installation?
okay, perfect. Okay.
But yeah, we have started to see a few of them, and it's fun idea.
All right, a manufactured hot tub,
Yeah.
I can't imagine getting a building permit for that.
So you only need one, and people do pull them just to run a gas line out if they're if it relies on a gas
If it's a
line.
gas hot
the
tub.
gas
Yeah.
company will, if it's a gas heated
Yeah.
hot tub, they will require a permit before they will authorize it from Dominion's end. So they'll ask the property owner for clearance.
So
we have to-
Will they know?
Well,
So they won't turn on the gas for it unless the city sends a clearance to them that we had a permit and it was
You're
inspected.
just gonna tap into the existing gas, the gas
That's
already.
if there's
turned
an
on.
existing
yeah,
one.
if there's an existing one, then we're saying no.
No, I mean, the gas for the home.
Oh, sometimes people run them through their yard to do a hot tub like in the middle of their yard.
Yeah.
So,
I might qualify gas versus electric, and I think,
sure,
you know, having a gas hot tub 6 feet away from a house makes sense.
sure.
But I don't know necessarily why an electric hot tub would need to be 6 feet away. from a
Yeah,
house.
and that seems to also address your point of like, probably wouldn't be needed, a building permit probably wouldn't be needed for just an electric one. It's just if you're running a new gas line, maybe that's reasonable, I think, to expect a permit for safety.
I might add to that, just a personal anecdote. When we purchased our house in Cottonwood Heights, there was a hot tub, I'm sure was not, there was no application needed. The previous homeowner took their hot tub with them. We were not interested in purchasing it. And the conduit, the electrical that was running through it was definitely not code. It was maybe the scariest thing that we had to dig that thing up and find a way to cap it. And it was such a home job in terms of the breaker was insufficient. I mean, I look back and I think that could have potentially been a nightmare. That's obviously an outlier situation, but if we're just it would have been very, very simple. It would have taken 2 seconds from a building permit standpoint. And it was kind of a headache digging that thing up. I was manually out there digging up that thing and trying to find out where it went and how to make sure I didn't have bare wires laying around under the ground in my backyard.
So that's great to share. And for the building permit process now, if someone's pulling a gas line permit or like a new electric permit, it's what we call an over-the-counter permit, where it's just a flat rate and it's issued usually same day. So it's
How much?
$47. It's the minimum permit fee that I think building code allows us to charge.
And
So-
I believe hot tubs now have to have their own separate breaker as well.
Oh,
So
interesting.
to have a certified electrician install hot tubs. So if you're purchasing from
Very cool.
most manufacturers, you have to have somebody actually put a separate box in the exterior of the house with its separate stop breaker as well.
Okay, good to know.
So I think that would actually prompt an electrician to have to come and pull a permit for it if it's a bonded and licensed electrician. So I think that might be something that'd be encouraging, is to have, refer to bonded electricians for the space to install that breaker.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. I wonder if we could do language that's like, if electrical or gas line work is needed, a building permit may be required, like please contact the building department to see.
Other jurisdictions have done that for any of these improvements in terms of that is a trigger.
Okay.
Um,
I
the other
thought
thing-
that was a statement. I wasn't sure if that was a question, but yeah, other communities have done this. It honestly, most of Utah's codes are borrowed one from another,
Right.
so a lot of the codes do lack. But it's not unheard of.
So
Today,
once
if I were running a gas line in my yard for anything, or a new electrical service in my yard, I'm supposed to come get a permit. That's,
Absolutely.
so I think maybe we'll approach this from the angle of kind of the ancillary utilities needed to serve these.
Yeah,
If they
rather
already
than the
require
thing
permits, they're
themselves.
gonna
Right.
require permits.
Yeah. If the thing you're adding to your yard needs upgraded utility service, get a permit for the
Right.
service.
Same as true with the splash pad. There's plenty of ways you could do a splash pad that might not require a permit. What do you think about a splash pad wood? Concrete pad? I mean,
Typically, they're permanent plumbing fixtures.
Yeah, just the.
So you're running-
of it.
Plumbing lines and water lines.
Or
that shoot
sometimes
out.
if it has outdoor lighting. If they're doing electrical work
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah.
We've seen a few, it's starting to become more common, but we have had someone pull the permit for both of them, because it did, I think one of them had a gas line, and then there was like lighting sconces around it that needed electrical.
So you may want to add swim spas to this area too. They're kind of a hybrid hot tub / pool, but they
Okay.
have some very, very large ones that can be bigger than a lot of pools.
Yeah. And I think in that space, I think we should qualify it as if it's gas versus electric
Okay,
as well.
yeah,
And was that with respect to the setback, like, because it does seem like if we are requiring certified, technicians to do this work, the 6 feet on the hot tub is the only one that it's just like, well,
you might want it like on your deck,
yeah.
closer, sure,
not only that, but I was just thinking some of these are inside.
sure, yeah.
So would this language seem to prohibit an inside?
These are only yard elements.
Okay.
Yeah, not
Oh,
indoor.
so the
So we're
language
talking
is
in the
just
yard. This
Just
is
for-
subsection,
Just
yeah.
for outside, I definitely see the logic on the hot tub one. I think that's a really good point to bring up. Like, it's pretty normal to stick one on your back deck, so you can pop out there.
But the gas component to that, there's
Sure.
a safety from a fire standpoint.
Right.
Because you actually have a combustible space.
So maybe if it's an electric hot tub, there's a more flexible step back there. With the pool one, we kind of debated that too, and ultimately we felt like it was important to have plenty of space around the pool. For safety for young kids or anything like that, so. Okay. I'm
Along
gonna-
that discussion with the pool, Sam, the other question I have for the group is, these days pools require some kind of an outbuilding in order to house, especially as people are going away from chlorine and saline systems. And these outbuildings are we going to treat them like sheds? And then there are people that are building full-on pool houses, almost like an accessory dwelling unit in the largest case, and they're popping up all over South Jordan and that southwest quadrant of the valley. So I would love to see us have some way to address that it's not just categorized as a shed, and how that relates to the house, how that relates to the setbacks. And did you guys discuss that at all as a staff?
So how we would treat those, or how we have to date, and what I'd recommend is that we just require it to meet accessory building setbacks. So that would be on interior lots, so one's not adjacent to a street on rear side, that would be 3 feet from rear and side property lines, maximum height of 14 feet.
Well, that seems really close to me.
That's what's allowed today in the code for all accessory buildings. So without doing a full code revision to every zoning section, that's what would be allowed.
Is there a height restriction along with that, Sam?
Yeah, 14 feet.
So you can build a 14-foot outbuilding within 3 feet of your property line
That's
right
correct.
now.
In most cases, again, I'll caveat that if you're on a corner lot, it has to be 20 feet from the corner side, curiously. Or if you're in a public utility easement, sometimes the utility company might prevent you from being in that area. But yeah, code allows up to 14 feet in height, 3 feet from the property line. And then if you want to go taller than that, you have to do a bigger setback, up to 20 feet in height and 9 feet in setback.
Is there any limitation to the size that structure can be in total?
That's a good question, and that actually will be a future code update because it's unclear.
Okay.
The only verbiage we have is that it has to be significantly smaller than the main home, and that's a problematic metric. So that's very much on the
Remember a red
list.
shed, Commissioner Shelton?
I
There was
know.
a big red garage that
Oh, yeah,
the council spent a lot of time on years ago. Commissioner Mills, we have had experiences with pool equipment structures on multiple occasions where the property owner will build the pool structure without getting it permitted. It's in the side yard or on the property line, and we've had to enforce. So that there's a lot of precedent for enforcing those like accessory structures. The only place we allow pool equipment outside of accessory structure regulations is if they're not covered by anything, which we have seen before, where the equipment's just kind of freestanding and exposed to the elements. We don't regulate that location.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna hop forward a few more. We can always come back. Playgrounds. So we are just proposing that playgrounds be located in the rear yard, 6 feet away from a main building, again for fire rating, and then at least 3 feet away from property lines. No building permit required. We feel like that's a little unreasonable. The distinction here would be if someone wanted to build like a playhouse, it's like more of an actual structure. Sometimes you see those really nice sort of playhouses that are more of like a tiny house or like almost a little casita type thing. That would just need to get a building permit and meet accessory building standards. But
Do you think that needs to be defined here?
Absolutely.
I'm gonna say, I think it needs to
Yeah.
be defined here because and what is a playground? There's a difference between something that just has 2 swings and a slide.
so I think
Which I
one way
agree
to
with it.
define it, and again, this is gonna have to be a wordsmithing work in process, but I think one way to do it is like if it's an open air recreational equipment versus like an enclosed,
Yeah, it's,
more structural item.
So-
yeah.
So it has an electrical service been, it's like if you're sending out power,
Totally.
that's usually been the trigger, right?
That's definitely
Or
one of them.
another.
Yeah, although we would still make like a shed without power meet the setbacks, and get a building permit if it was over 200 square feet. So I think with playhouses, we'd do something similar where it's like if it's over this many square feet or you're running electricity or water or gas to it, get a building permit.
Even if it's built above ground, it still would need to follow that.
And 200 square feet is not tiny.
No, that's pretty big.
That's pretty big.
200 square feet on its footprint.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So I was gonna say, is that a 200 square foot playground or not?
That's probably
Saying-
60.
we're saying that no playground needs a building permit. We're just saying if it was like a
Setbacks.
playhouse, that's more of like one of those kind of mini casita type things,
I was just saying that maybe the easiest way to distinguish
is just square
is square
footage.
footage.
Yeah.
Because I could have a really big playground if I wanted to.
yeah.
And do we care? Is that a problem? I don't know. That's the.
Why not? I think as long as there's not, I mean, if you wanted to take your whole yard and make it a playground with no kind of building on it.
Right,
If you wanted just all swings or something, I mean, that's,
that's the question.
I mean, I
inspiring.
think it's when you put something that has a roof on it that's enclosed and then it becomes a
We
different.
tend to see it from a planning perspective as like, once it dips its toes into the pool of occupancy, where like somebody could be occupying it, that's when we're more like, yeah, it's gotta meet all these standards and get a building permit.
Yeah.
With the playground, our approach here was, we want it to be set back somewhat from property lines, just for that little bit of noise buffering and site buffering, so you maybe don't have kids like right on a property line staring into your yard. But wanting to be really reasonable and not make people pull a building permit.
Definitely need room to climb the fence separately.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
We need
Launch
room
yourself
to,
over the
Dog.
fence off the
You gotta-
swings, yeah.
we need room to
Get the dog
trespass.
and make sure that the dog doesn't eat all the baseballs.
So that's been our approach on this one.
Another thing that troubles me about all these is the side yards in the corner. So what's a rear yard definition?
Yeah, I don't have a great way to draw on a whiteboard right now, but a rear yard is anything behind the back wall of the home. So like if you think of the back wall of your home moving outward to where your rear property line is, that's your rear yard.
So if someone doesn't have, they have a big side yard, but not a big
We
backyard.
can make it say or side yard. I think we just don't really want them in the front yard. Because that could become a blurred line where all of a sudden you have something that's a shed and someone says it's playground. So we could say rear or side yard.
I think in most cases, it's gonna come up on courts, and I know several of these that are in what would be considered side yards, but side yards are generally okay with me, I
Yeah.
think.
I do think for like, I definitely agree, and I'm so glad you caught that, especially on playgrounds. I'm not sure what the temperature is on the other ones being in side yards. Historically, we've made all the other ones be in the rear yard.
I think a gazebo in a side yard, I'm fine
Are
with
you
that.
talking into all side yards, corner side yards?
Well, aren't you gonna have configuration issues for any houses with lots on cul-de-sacs or corner lots as well?
Yeah, you might, and historically, it's just been like, this is what the code says. The code says accessory structures have to be in the rear yard. That's explicitly stated in the code, so that's how we're gonna do it. But again, since we're calling these things out kind of as their own type, there's an opportunity here to change how the yard element thing is done.
Yeah.
Is the setback different on the side versus the back?
Sorry, what?
Is the setback different for building structures on a like a side fence or a side yard versus a back fence?
It's just 3 feet from both.
Oh,
It's-
from both, okay.
And it still need to be 6 feet away from the main building, I
Correct.
think. I mean, so that's gonna be a pretty good size side
Yeah,
yard.
sometimes
right?
in corner side yards, you have houses that are next to each other that have, window openings and stuff. We've had complaints over hot tubs and things like that in those side yard areas, because it's usually a little tighter than the backyards and the houses are oriented a little more towards each other, but certainly.
Commissioner Smith, what was your question?
Just, is there a mechanism for any exceptions to this? I'm thinking of a friend of mine who has a beautiful yard that he's maintained very well. It's about a full acre. He has a swimming pool in the back, and in the front yard, I don't know if you know where Madison Lane is, but it's up in that neighborhood, and he's had a trampoline, and I think he's had a couple of other structures that really are appealing. I
Sure.
can't imagine the neighbors would complain about that, because it really has enhanced the area.
I don't recommend doing exceptions for it because I think it can be subjective with what one person finds appealing versus another. So just from like an administration standpoint, we try to be pretty like unilateral without the exception, because it can create a really challenging enforcement procedure if somebody says it's subjective.
Sure.
But I understand it's constantly a dance between like trying to be reasonable and also trying to have a consistent thing across the board.
So if somebody does build something like my friend has, and he's a very good builder, and his neighbors haven't complained, is he okay with that? Or
If
is
not
he-
by the city, it wouldn't be city code to put structures in the front yard.
But he's okay until somebody complains about that, or?
Most code enforcement.
Well, let's stop
is-
talking.
Yeah.
He's in Sandy.
Most code enforcement is done on a complaint basis, but he would be open to citations. If you were in Cottonwood Heights, open to citations if the code enforcement department happened to notice it. It just kind of depends. So,
I have a friend who has I think one of the nicest homes I've been to, nicest yards at least, and he has both a pool and a court and a hot tub, all in his side yard by that definition, and I think you'd find anyone, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who would complain about that yard. That yard is spectacular.
Well,
So I have similar to.
definitely, I would urge, and probably from staff, not support doing anything in the front yard, because I think that just creates a lot of issues. But we could definitely look at side yards. My recommendation would be that accessory buildings outside of these yard elements still be in the rear yard,
Yes.
but that maybe these specific yard elements we're calling out could be in the side.
And to me, it shouldn't be any further forward than the front of the house.
That's how side yard is defined in
Yeah,
city code.
so anything behind the house in the side yard, I would put any of these structures.
Yeah.
As long as they meet the setbacks.
Would you want to
and-
see them fenced in, the fencing requirement, and pools might have that already, but.
Pools will by building code have a fence around it, but the other ones probably wouldn't.
Or electronic cover, I'd imagine.
Probably.
Yeah.
If you put a gazebo in your side yard, do you need a fence around?
No, maybe not for all of them, but especially the pools and the, you know, maybe it's just the.
If it's a safety issue,
then-
I remember a case where someone was adding a hot tub to a short-term rental, a legal short-term rental, and the neighbor was like, I'm really concerned because we've got young kids and this is a townhome, so there's no fence between it, and if you put a hot tub on the back patio, that opens it up to my kids. So the fencing thing could be a valid option, just to make sure that water is,
Which you can lock covers on those, so.
We'll look at it.
yeah. We'll look at it.
We'll make some recommendations.
I can think of, and bringing up gazebos, I can think of 3 homes in Cottonwood Heights that have gazebos in the front yard, beautiful, estates.
Yeah,
But that might be something that we want to consider as far as maybe some review process for front yard gazebos to maintain certain design elements potentially. Right now I can think of 3 exactly.
so state code preempts cities from requiring design review for single family properties.
Okay,
I don't know if that would apply if it's like an elective thing where it's like,
Yeah.
well, if you want to do this, you can. But I do know that could be a potential issue is there was a change in state code that said,
I think
I-
that would hang us up, I think.
Yeah, I just think it's so subjective that, because we want to stay away from different areas having different looking at it differently because of where the home's
I think-
located. And I just,
it would be great if the code could work on a basis of being like, if it looks nice and it's well kept, you can do it. And that's like what we're all thinking of, I think. But unfortunately, the code can't work that way because that's a subjective thing. So I think we have to be kind of a wider net with how it's done, just from an enforcement perspective, would be my recommendation, but.
This is again out of left field maybe, but I was thinking about some of the things we proposed putting in the front yard of this building.
Oh, okay.
But sometimes things in the front yard of commercial buildings
Yeah.
are a little different
So-
story.
So typically, and this dates back to the question of commercial versus residential. We don't have in most of our commercial zones, correct me if I'm wrong, planners, there's no standards that differentiate accessory buildings from primary buildings. It's all just setbacks. And if you meet the setbacks, we have always interpreted it as if it's an accessory building, it just has to meet the same setbacks as the building. It can be in the front, it can be in the back, it can be in the side yard, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's historically how it's
So
been
the same
done
thing could apply if you have a patio or a plaza like this, as long as
Clock
it meets the-
tower
yeah.
or,
with the differentiation of what we're proposing on carports.
Right, carports is a separate thing, but
well, and now you're kind of splitting out things from that definition of accessory build or accessory
Yeah.
building.
but even today in commercial, we would allow an accessory building in a front yard if it met the
The main
standard
building setback.
setback that are for any structure in that zone.
But not in residential.
Residential's just.
So sorry, did I catch that right? A full accessory building, like an accessory dwelling unit could go in a front yard?
It wouldn't be, sorry, so not for
Not
residential.
dwelling.
So
Oh,
like
okay.
in a
Yeah,
commercial zone,
accessory, yeah.
somebody could be like, I'm doing a,
Hold on.
no,
No.
just in commercial zones and accessory dwelling units aren't allowed in commercial zones. Okay, I'm gonna move forward. I'm gonna try to get us through these next ones. So we leave a little bit of time if needed. Tree houses, this is every planner's worst nightmare because it's like really, really unclear. So tree houses, we're not proposing any specification on front, rear, or side because trees are not limited to a backyard. Trees are all over a yard typically. We are just saying we think they should be 3 to 9 feet away from the property lines, not more than respectively 14 to 20 feet tall. So if it's 3 feet away from a property line, it can be up to 14 feet tall. If it's 9 feet away, it can be up to 20, is how accessory structures are done today. We are saying we think they should be less than 100 square feet, which is 10 by 10, cannot have electricity or water run to them, and cannot be used as occupiable space. No building permit required. So that's our leaning on this. We are trying to leave flexibility for someone to like build a treehouse with their kids, but not have it be occupiable or overly large.
We had one of these
Oh,
too.
yeah, Sure
A
did.
treehouse in the side yard or front yard,
In the front yard,
not permitted then.
yeah.
Yeah, and this, we're saying it could be in the front yard if it's a treehouse. We're not proposing regulations on it because it seems like trees might not be just in the backyard, but open to discussion.
The 14 to 20 is from the ground. It's
Not yet.
not, the structure itself isn't that big. It's, we're measuring from the ground, so that judges how. far up
I
in the
think we
tree.
better define that because I think that someone will go, oh, well, you know, my.
Put a 20
my
tall
treehouse
structure
is-"
width at the top
Yeah.
of the tree.
Attached to the tree.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm
That'll
gonna,
sound great.
solar panels need an electric. I'm just trying to think if
Solar panels
solar-
could be electric.
I mean, solar panels, if someone wanted to put a solar, oh, it still requires
They
electric.
could put solar panels on a treehouse. They could do it on an accessory building and it would have to meet the setback standards for that, but treehouses, we want to allow plenty of freedom for something that's truly just a treehouse with some guardrails that keep it from being like a dwelling unit or occupiable or
This is a shed.
used as a shed in a front yard. So
Well, all the 10 to 12-year-olds in my neighborhood are going to be very dismayed by this, but I think it's well written and I think it works.
that might be the mark of a good code.
Yes.
I guess
Yeah,
we're not,
don't like it.
Discuss the 10-year-old.
I guess we're not trying to court the next episode of Treehouse Masters.
Yeah,
I just like live in fear of when people call and ask about this because it's just frustrating right now.
Might have to
So-
have liability and homeowner.
I mean, just how it's written though, just keep this in mind. I mean, it's have electricity or water run to it, so you could have a water collection system and you could have a self-integrated solar system and it would still comply with the way the language is written.
Maybe no electricity or water serving them.
So this is a weird question, but if you wanted to have, let's say you wanted to build a treehouse master's treehouse.
Great.
And you, I mean, you wanted to put it in the middle of your 10-acre parcel in Cottonwood Heights. And it was, whatever, 500 square feet.
Oh,
Could you not do it?
you could do it. It would have to meet accessory building standards at that point.
Because this is.
I think what we're saying is once if you are outside of these parameters, you're kicked into
Okay.
accessory structure codes and whatever else.
All right.
You can still
I'm
have
good
your
with that. That makes
fantasy,
sense.
your fantasy tree house, just gotta make it.
Yeah.
So long as the definition doesn't say, hey, you have my 500 square. feet.
Yeah, that's a good specification where we could have some explicit language that says like metrics beyond this revert to accessory buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. Yeah,
That's fine.
okay.
Okay, is everyone good if I jump one more forward?
Yeah.
Okay, sport courts, it's our last one. So we talked at the very beginning about how basketball hoops we think are just decorative, no big deal. Sometimes we get requests to do more of a sport court that's a little more substantial with netting or an enclosure around it on mostly large yards. We are just proposing that if it's put right on the property line, the fencing standards need to be met for that netting, so no taller than what a fence would be allowed as. If they want to make the netting or like the enclosure, sometimes it's like a chain link court thing, taller than what a fence would be, they just need to set it back to that accessory building setback.
Can this trigger maximum permeable surface area on the lot pretty quickly?
Yeah, I mean, if they're using an impermeable paver on it, then it would go toward that, and that's something that our staff would currently review with these.
That applies only in sensitive lands areas,
Okay,
not everywhere in the city.
So the current fence code would not allow you to build a 20-foot tall
Correct,
at any setback.
correct. Well, the current fence
No.
code is just for property lines, so fencing on property lines. 6 feet in height. If somebody wants to build a taller fence than that and they meet the accessory building setback, we've let them because they set it back to where a building would be, and then it can be as tall as
As the building.
yeah. It's just that people typically wouldn't do that because then they'd be fencing out of 3 feet of their property.
That's the way we counteract
Parking
it.
strip on both sides. of
Where-
the sidewalk.
The fence code right now requires neighbor consent if you go above a certain point. We don't think neighbor consent should be required if you're 15 feet into your own yard. You're not on a shared property line.
So this is
So
just,
that's,
Is that what the code says, though? I don't remember exactly how it read, the
for fencing.
fence height
I don't
code.
remember
So
that.
fence
If
has,
setback would eliminate the fence height
it
requirement.
hasn't, and so that's been an interpretation where we've said, we know you can't put an accessory structure on a property line, but we know you can put an accessory structure 3 feet in. So by that, what we see is reasonable logic. If you're right on a property line, you got to meet the fencing, but if you set it back, you can meet the accessory building. So that's what we would propose here.
So wouldn't that same fencing criteria be for swimming pools too? Like if someone wanted to put around anything
Yeah,
in your yard, it
that's-
wouldn't matter
that's
what
what
it
we-
was, any
that's-
kind of fencing.
That's what we've done to date.
Okay.
Most people on swimming pools do just the bare minimum
Yeah.
for what building code requires, but yeah, that's how we've treated it so far is like, you can have a taller fence, but you've got to put it back to where a structure would be. And then we have required building permits for footings, for anything over 6 feet, just to make sure like the load is proper on it with wind, I think. And then for any lighting, sometimes folks want to do the lighting over the sport court and require a building permit for that.
Any type of lighting or just hardwire?
So if they're pulling a new electrical permit, obviously, yes. And then if they're not, we just say it's got to meet the outdoor lighting ordinance. So here's the language, make sure you follow it.
Is there a different sorry, I should know this, but is there a different outdoor lighting ordinance for residential versus commercial?
There is.
Okay.
Okay, that is getting to the end of our discussion. This was just a summary of everything we talked about. I think you guys gave staff really good notes. So we will work on this, bring it back. It's going to kind of depend on what development applications we get on when we bring it back, because we want to make sure we leave space for applicants on our agendas, but that is very helpful. Commissioner Mills, I can make a few more notes about our next meeting, but I'll turn the time over to you if you have anything else.
No, I think that's that covered things nicely. And I think I can speak for all of us that we're grateful that we're taking this in chunks. It's that you saw how much conversation that generated just with those items. I would recommend we don't take more than that many items, because I do think that was very rich discussion. So thanks for everyone's contributions. So if we don't have anything else as a group that we need to discuss, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion
Make
to
a
adjourn.
quick note, if that's okay, before we adjourn.
Please.
On the minutes, we have the minutes in our packet today for approval from March 8th. That's our last meeting. I just wanted to note verbally for the record a few changes staff would recommend, so that if you do make a motion to approve, you might include reference to staff changes in that motion. I'm just going to read those into the record really quick. So on page 1, Maria Devereaux's last name is misspelled. So just a correction there. On page 2 of the work session, and I have these all highlighted, Maria, so I can
thank
give them to you. We proposed the word roughly be added before 15 on line 9, where it says Mr. Johnson responded that there have been 15 approvals in the city's history. Moving on to the business meeting packet, again, misspelling of Maria's last name. The line 40 on page 3 states 50 acres in size, it's 0.5 acres. And then lines 3 and 4 should have staff recommended approval with conditions added. And that was the last. So just a few minor changes from staff, but wanted to mention those now for the minutes agenda item in the business meeting. That's all from me.
Motion to
Just go ahead.
motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion, and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. See you guys in a couple minutes.
Okay, good. Remember to hop on the second link. It's a separate one for the next.